Hello humans, welcome to the M-Word podcast, brought to you by Martin, that's me,
and Matt.
that's him. Hello Matt.
Alright.
Hello Andrew.
Hello.
Thanks for joining us.
No problem.
Loads to dig into. The first thing is, where is the name Roche from?
So, good question. Roche.
I've googled it so I know the answer.
So, well, our interpretation of it is from the Irish kind of link of Roche.
Okay.
And before that is from the French Normans, I think. Is
That's
that right?
right, yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
I got my homework right there. And then that went to Ireland, and that's a strong name in Ireland now. And my dad his family is from Ireland, so Roche stems from there. Although
Right, okay.
I'm actually from the Isle of Man myself. My mum was from Peel,
Okay.
being a Gael.
Oh, right, okay.
So, but yeah, still keep that kind of strong connection with Roche and that kind of Irish link to the name as well.
Have you still family over there? Ireland?
I've got kind of distant families, cousins and long lost relatives and what have you. Yeah, definitely.
I know you go to Canada a bit. Have you got family there as well?
Both my sisters live in Canada.
Okay.
So I actually grew up in Canada. So we moved. I was born on the island and then moved to Canada when I was 4 years old. So I spent pretty much all of my teenage life in Canada, which is kind of a little bit different. Like I have a little bit of a different upbringing, I suppose, to your average person my same age on the island, if you like. So yeah.
Whereabouts in Canada?
Close to Calgary. So Calgary's kind of the biggest town from where I would be. So I'm 2 hours south of there, a place called Lethbridge.
Okay.
Close to the Rockies.
Right, okay. So what was life like being brought up in Canada? Learning to ski and
Good,
French?
actually. Yeah, I actually loved it.
And you must know French then with the name
No,
and being in Canada.
We were the opposite side, so we didn't learn French on our side. So I suppose my upbringing, I'm from, well, born in the 70s, but kind of, teenage life was through the 80s. So look at any typical American 80s based high school film, and that's kind of what life was like.
Singing and dancing, is that not what all American kids
BMX
who
and
screech
skateboarding.
from Saved by the Bell?
Yeah, kind of like that.
And were you riding bikes at a younger age?
BMX. So yeah, I never rode a road bike until we actually moved back to the Isle of Man.
Right.
So I was BMXing, but I BMXed kind of national series level when we were living there. Kind of chasing national rounds through into America as well. So did that up until I was 15, I guess, and then we moved back to the island when I was 15, kind of just going on 16.
What brought the family back here?
Just economy, basically. So Canada was going through a recession at that time, so the parents just wanted to kind of get back to the island at the time. And
What age were you then at that age?
I was kind of a difficult age actually. So I was 15, so last couple of years in school.
A load of mates there, etc.
Yeah, so everyone I grew up with, I kind of left, moved back here, didn't really know anybody, didn't kind of get how school worked here. School was extremely different here to what it was over there. Not that I was great in school anyway. It was not one of my life loves, if you like. So yeah, it was in that sense, it was quite difficult, kind of moving back, meeting new friends, just kind of getting into that groove and I suppose that's why sport really helped me. I suppose kind of got into cycling then, and then you meet a lot of people within sport, so that's what kicked that off.
Was that straight into road cycling then at kind of 15, 16?
Yeah, so I mean when we moved back I still wanted to race BMX, but we didn't really have it on the island. So my dad used to race bikes, so I took an interest from my dad racing, and that's what kind of spurred me into doing it, really.
Did your dad have good pedigree?
Yeah, I mean he was. I'm trying to think back to what my dad had done. My dad was always a good bike rider. Back then, I suppose they didn't have enough money to travel to all the races, so he was good on the island. He held the mountain time trial record for a long time. He was asked to ride the milk race, I think, towards the end of his career, but he was kind of working back then, so work took over and kind of
good standard then for sure.
Yeah.
And you've got, I know, you say you got two sisters in Canada. You got other siblings?
No, just my two sisters.
Right. Did they stay there? Did they come here and then go back out?
No, one stayed,
right.
And then one came back, and then she went back over there probably, maybe 15 years maybe ago now, maybe longer than that actually.
And as you got into the road cycling, how quickly did you realise that you're reasonably good at it, to say the least?
I suppose I kind of took to it quite quick because I had ridden a bike. Like everything I did was on a bike before that. So like I said, I raced BMX. Anytime me and my pals went out, it was always on a bike. You know, we would ride stupid distances on BMX bikes basically. So I think the first race I ever did on the Isle of Man, I won it. and then the first race I ever went away to was the schoolboy, what would be youth championships nowadays in Liverpool. And I won that, so so I knew I could do something with it.
Yeah. I know that's just through, I wouldn't even say structured training, just riding your bike. And
that was just through riding my bike. I didn't know what structured
talent.
training was. Right?
Having some, talent, that is, I guess, shining through.
Yeah.
So how did that progress into taking it more seriously? You know, school finished, I assume, and then... Did you start working with? I know you worked with your dad for a while. Was that back then?
I did. I suppose. Well, when I left school, I started an apprenticeship as an electrician. So I went through that and then kind of continued racing. So I was doing back then what was called still is the Peter Buckley series. So that's the junior series that's still going now. So I was doing that. So
that's all for top juniors around the UK.
Yeah. So carried on racing through those. And I was, I suppose, a decent junior. You know, I could get good results in those races. And kind of followed that as well as kind of working with my dad. I never really liked the job I was doing. It's just kind of where I landed at the time. I suppose people, you know, at my age, I suppose back then there wasn't a lot of opportunity. You kind of either went into an office job or you started a trade. That's kind of how it worked. And I picked the trade route kind of, not by choice, it's just that's what was there. My dad did it, so that's what I started doing.
Who were you racing with? Who was around at that time of your age?
So junior-wise, we've got Matthew Stevens. Who else was around those days? So Matthew Stevens obviously commentates on GCN and the likes now. A couple of years older than me. Obviously, there was Rob Holden. So Rob was kind of... He was in Manchester Wheelers and coming back and forward to the island at that time. So he was kind of somebody who I kind of looked up to then. You know, he was, you know, one of these guys who was riding the milk race at the time, and I was I was still junior then, and he was kind of
one of the leading UK pros,
one of the big hitters in the UK. So it was always kind of cool seeing him riding on the island. Kind of like today, where you get, you know, people like Ben Swift and the likes coming over. You know, people look up to those guys, I'm sure, in the same light. So yeah,
so the milk race, that was, I suppose, what you now is the Tour of Britain, really, isn't it? Resurrected. It's the old Tour of Britain.
Yeah,
the milk sponsored it, I think, if I recall.
Well, it kind of, so the milk race then, I suppose there was the milk race and there was the Tour of Britain. So the milk race was the amateur version, I think, and then they had the Tour of Britain kind of came in a little bit later, which was the pro only one, and then it kind of merged together, didn't it? And it's kind of now what we know as the Tour of Britain.
And for you then as a junior, I mean, locally, one, who was around, and two, were you obviously going well in the UK? Were you the standout? Is the word talent? That's the word you don't mind being associated with on the island. Were you that top talent on the island at that stage?
I guess I was. I mean, I don't like saying
no,
that.
We'll say it then. I said it. It's fine.
Yeah. Because last year junior, I got selected onto the Worlds team as well. So went to Moscow to ride the Junior Worlds. And I'm not too sure if anybody else from the island up until kind of recent days has done that actually. And definitely Max and people like that have definitely done it more recently.
Yeah.
I say at that time then, were you thinking that could be a route then if work wise we weren't really, let's say, enthralled with it? Yeah. So in the back of your mind when picking up all these races, was that kind of where you were more leaning into putting your energy into and trying to see where you can go? Yeah.
Well, definitely. For sure. Back then, that's my dream, was to be a pro bike rider, basically.
Oh, right, okay.
Like I said, didn't.
I mean, at that stage, you look at that today as someone coming through the ranks, and there's obviously quite clear paths. Back then, it was, I think, Belgium try and be recognised, or continent try and be recognised. But the path was a lot less clear. Obviously, the British cyclists in general weren't what you see today, so that must have been quite hard to envisage that, just by the pure nature that not many people made it. There was the Robert Millers, I guess, around that time that were good. So like you say, Rob was kind of working through those ranks as well. But where I think today a 16-year-old can actually, it feels like not an easy dream. You have to work hard and get there. But back then, I'd have thought it would be even harder to imagine reaching those heights.
Yeah, well, like you say, the pathway, there wasn't a pathway. I remember saying to different people that I wanted to be a pro bike rider, and people would just say, "Don't be so stupid. What are you talking about?" And very, very few people did kind of back then. Definitely, I suppose the end of the 80s, early 90s. You could just look at the stats. So the amount of pro bike riders that we had from the 80s, say, for example, from the UK or from Ireland, very, very few compared to now. But that's just kind of life in general, isn't it? Opportunities change. The sport's definitely changed massively. So those pathways are in place now for people to aspire to, which makes it a heck of a lot more, aspiring to young people getting involved in the sport. At least they can see an opportunity if they're good enough to do it. By no means is it easy. Definitely not easy.
And you mentioned so Moscow, quite a big, appreciate you going with a GB squad, I guess, but at a fairly young age, how did you find travelling there and going to?
I loved it, actually. So the travelling side of it is something that I really did love and still do love about the sport, actually. So, like GB days then, I remember, so we went out, got given clothing, tracksuits, all the gear and everything else. And we had to give it all back at the end of the race. That was their budget back then.
Yeah.
So their budget was basically zero back then compared to what they have now. We arrived Moscow, kind of World Championships. No real, we had a mechanic with us who was just kind of dabbling with a few screwdrivers and stuff. Didn't have a clue what he was doing really, and it's just massively changed. That would never happen nowadays.
And I mean, we'll come on to chat, because part of this conversation came up when we were chatting online about Lance Armstrong. But back then, there's the sort of the Iron Curtain, and certainly if you watch stuff about doping and performance enhancing Icarus, things like that, Russia was, the naughty little people, apparently. But even back then, was that something at that early stage you might have been aware of that was going on, or rumours that, whether it was British or generally around in the sport?
As a junior, no, I would have been completely oblivious to it. Lance Armstrong actually rode the same junior world championships that I rode.
Okay.
And I doubt he was doing anything then.
No.
I would hope not anyway. But yeah, I couldn't.
Not from the Russian side, but just that. I don't know whether they turned up and absolutely smashed everyone. I don't know.
Well, they did actually. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Right. They cleaned up on the track at that time. Maybe.
But again, no intimation at that young age. That,
I wouldn't.
Not that we're implying there was either, but just
I wouldn't have. Even if guys were blatantly doing it, I probably wouldn't have even known what the heck they were doing, really.
Right. So what progressed after the junior ranks? You presumably go into senior, and this must be early 90s.
Yeah, early 90s. So yeah, I went from junior up to senior. Again, kind of doing the equivalent of our Premier Series now, used to be called the Star Trophies then, and like I say, still desperate. All I wanted to do was to become a pro bike rider. So, doing everything that I could at that time to do it. So I was, did a couple of years racing in the UK, getting some decent results, and then just talking to as many people as I could just to get an opportunity somewhere that I could kind of get a ride. So that happened by chance, actually. So I kind of went, like you said, there wasn't really there was still no pathway then. So there, still very, very few pro bike riders, probably less actually then than there was in the 80s, who were coming from the UK and Ireland. So I made a couple of connections in America. So went out to America for a year, raced there, had some good results, and then had the offer to go back the following year on a pro ride. But that same winter I came back to the island and had an offer to go to Europe on a pro ride. So it was kind of quite a big decision. So obviously all I wanted to do was, you want to be a pro bike rider, but your ultimate dream is to ride the Tour de France. So Europe was then that option. That's the one I went with.
Right. And what team was that back then?
A team called FS Maestro at the time. So it was the only UK pro team. So a UK registered pro team. And the guy that kind of put the bolts in place for that was Tim Harris. So he's now the director, one of the DSs for Bahrain Merida. So he was still rider manager at that time. Kind of a big influence for me really throughout my whole kind of racing years from then on. So
is he a little bit older, is he?
He's probably, I think he's 12 years older than me. Okay. So in his 30s. Yeah, my dream. So I kind of, obviously I took that option, went to Belgium, raced there.
And at that outset, is that a paid contract, or is that we'll pay your expenses? And if you win something, you share it.
So at that time, I turned pro in 90. I was in America in 95. Turned pro in 96 in Belgium, and it was just a really small Belgian pro team. So expenses, obviously, I didn't have to pay for anything, and that's how probably at least half the pro teams that were racing back then kind of worked. I mean, there was guys riding the Tour de France who were getting paid 10 grand a year then. So again, that's how times have changed. But obviously it was a massive opportunity to jump at, and we rode, all the races you kind of watch on television, racing with the top guys. And again, sport the way it was then, you didn't have all the divisions within pro leagues, so you were either pro or you were amateur. There was no in between. So when you turned pro, you were just
in with the big boys.
It was the equivalent of being World Tour basically. You were just riding every race that you could possibly ride.
And was it a shock to the system joining that?
Massive change in pace, like the speed between amateur and pro then, and I'm sure it is now, was such a big jump. But at the same time, I wasn't kind of embarrassing myself either. I was first year pros getting some top 20 results in decent races.
Oh. So let's backtrack slightly then into 93, when I think the drugs and cycling changed massively, when the first use of what they believe is EPO, was EPO ran then. There was a team called G-Wiz, I think they were, and they came from kind of not nowhere. They had good riders, but they were kind of 1, 2, 3 in racing, and you look back and you kind of laugh at it really in hindsight, but at the time they just seemed to dominate, and that was the era where EPO seemed to first sort of rear its head more and more and become more prevalent. So you mentioned there 95, 96 into Europe. Is that something you'd seen or aware of before you made that step into Europe?
So before the step, obviously I've seen those results on television as well, and just being naive, you think, geez, these guys are amazing, sort of thing. Yeah. And not until I landed in that world did I kind of realize what was going on. So like I say, Tim Harris was the rider sort of manager of the team in a sense. He'd been pro for 12 years at that time, so he'd ridden with Festina and some of the big teams along the way. And even then, he'd seen the change, so he was getting dropped in races, whereas he'd never been dropped, just out the back on his own before in a race in his life. So he kind of seen the change more so than we did. We just arrived there and thought, this is as fast as it is. That's just what it's like. So it was kind of just speaking to guys who'd already been there and they'd seen it. They'd seen how that speed and everything had changed. Then we got to know what was going on, really.
And was that slow progression of knowledge, of kind of suspicion, not suspicion, but doesn't seem right, and then someone might say something, and...
Not really. I suppose...
Tim talked to you about it?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, we seen it. I mean, I remember showing up to one race in particular, kind of sitting in the changing rooms. There's, again, no team buses then, sort of sitting in the changing rooms with some of these guys, and they were just pulling out needles and whacking it into the car. And now I know what they were using, and that was kind of older guys who'd been around a long time, and they were still using amphetamine at that time, and they were just kind of juicing themselves up ready for action, basically. And that was a big eye opener. And then obviously we got to know what was happening in a lot of the races, which was massive use of VPO and growth hormone and everything else. And And just again, we didn't really know what it was because I'd never even heard of the stuff, So you just still thought you were just getting your head kicked in because these guys were better than you. You didn't really kind of understand what the benefit was to all this stuff they were taking. Obviously that changed over a bit of time. You now most people will kind of realize what sports enhancement does for the people that are doing it. But at the time, we were just kind of.
I mean, if you look back at that now, as you're in that environment, you're seeing and aware of it. Then, there's obviously some self-responsibility in whether you take them or not. But do you get annoyed by the governing bodies and people that are supposed to control those things? Because if it was fairly open that it was going on to a point that, again, only from the outside looks little action about it, certainly until we fast forward to 99, there doesn't seem to be a lot of action about it. Don't get me wrong, there could have been a lot going on, but does that agree with you?
Not so much, really, no.
Where do you lay the blame? On the rider for making the decision?
No, I wouldn't really, because I get both sides of the story, so I had to make the decision myself, really, and I could have swung it both ways. I can see why you would do it. So, like I say, all I ever wanted to do was be a pro bike rider. I got my foot on the ladder and I'd kind of climbed halfway up the ladder, and then I kind of basically hit a brick wall where either you try and do it clean or you take the gear and you can keep climbing the ladder.
Do you remember those days thinking about that?
Yeah, oh yeah, definitely. And it was quite hard, actually. I couldn't have done it because I don't think I could have lived with myself if I'd have done it. And there's definitely a lot of guys who haven't lived with themselves. There's a lot of people who've kind of definitely had mental problems over the guys who had done it. Some of them aren't even around today. Like Pantani, obviously, there's a good case. Maybe he would have, not been great anyway. But there's a lot of guys who definitely, I think, were affected big time by taking the drugs they were taking, and you just couldn't deal with the decision that they'd made, basically.
And so, when you are sat there in the changing rooms and seeing that going on, I know you're saying about looking back and being naive on it, but was it not a ruling that you're not supposed to ask about it? If you see needles going on, you're not saying what are you doing, or you don't speak to the manager, or is it just kind of he's doing that must just be a normal thing, or were you kind of were you told, I guess, that goes on, don't question it, carry on with your race sort of thing? It's just from seeing it, and I'm not kind of saying this is wrong, don't do it.
Yeah.
But I know you're not supposed to, because being inside in that world and that side, it's kind of like, were you specifically told this goes on, don't do it, or was it just this is just natural and that's just how it is, and you do what you do and you go race?
Yeah. Kind of the latter of what you said there, really. So you've landed in their world, basically.
Yeah.
This is where you are now, so accept it or else leave. And I remember doing one race in particular. So our team manager at the time, he knew what was going on, and he'd ridden the Tour de France and stuff like that as well. And he'd seen a change, and he didn't like it. And we had our second team manager come with us to a particular race that we're doing. I can't remember what the heck the race was now, but I do remember we were all sat down at the table and we were getting our heads kicked in. Basically, it was a stage race, and the manager turned around to the whole lot of us and basically just said, either all of you start doing what these guys are doing, or just you might as well go home. Wow. And as clear as day as that. But that's what they expected of you. So if you didn't kind of jump on the bandwagon and accept what that world was all about, they didn't even want to know you, basically. And the older riders from that time period as well, that was their kind of mentality. You either accept what we're doing or else leave.
Wow.
So
we ever directly offered them? Or did you think it was?
I was, yeah.
Oh, right, okay.
But, yeah, but I never did it.
Yeah. Was there the not doing bit? Is that you talk about being able to live with yourself, if that's the right term? Do you think there's an element? And again, I think if I was put in that position, one of my biggest fears would be if it caused me a problem, you know, and I was found dead in a ditch, what that would leave, and that kind of scared maybe of taking them, because I don't, you know, great, I could be flying, but also they could. I look as a youngster going out with lads and doing recreational stuff, which I never bothered didn't ever do, and I think my biggest fear of probably not doing them, one, I wasn't that fussed, but it was, I don't want to be found dead in a ditch.
Yeah. I mean, there is that side of it. I suppose that side never really bothered me, to be honest with you, but weirdly, but a lot of, I never really think of things that'll kill me.
That's what Hamilton. So Tyler Hamilton, for those that don't know, he was one of Armstrong's teammates for a while, and he was kind of one of the big names that initially came out about it and broke the silence really. And he talked. The reason he got first disqualified or caught a positive test was he was blood doping, and they put the wrong blood in him, so they took his blood out and another few cyclists, and then when they had to put the blood back in halfway through a tour, they stuck someone else's blood in, which is a horrifying thought, isn't it?
Oh yeah.
You don't know what's in it.
Definitely.
And they found someone else's blood cells in him. So that, and when I was listening to that, I just thought, I wonder if that, you know, that's some people's thought process of they're just scared of the outcome.
So, well, yeah.
Maybe when you're younger, I don't know, you're less.
I suppose, but you're scared of the outcome but there's two outcomes. So, like you say, you know, you've done everything you can to become a good bike rider, the best bike rider in the world, basically. So your outcome is, I've gotten this far. So if I don't do what everyone else is doing, then my outcome is I go back to doing something I hate, and I'm unemployed, basically. Yeah. So that's where I kind of get both sides of it. Like I had Russian teammates. So what have they got? You know, at that time, they had nothing to go back to. So they had terrible living conditions. Family life was awful. So I kind of get it, really. Yeah. I understand why some of them did it. I couldn't have done it. I think my mum was my biggest thing. So
getting telling off.
Yeah, there's no way that I could have faced my mum if I'd ever done it. And that's just my upbringing, basically. So I think that's kind of where that situation lies with a lot of people. I think a lot of it ties back to your upbringing, and you know what you've learned to be right and what's wrong, sort of thing. And that has to be something that's strong within you, and that's the only thing that can make you choose the right or the wrong. Yeah,
because again, Hamilton he talks very similar, although again, absolutely no idea, but he talks about a strong upbringing. He knew what was right and wrong. Yeah. But he was just so immersed, and he was, I wouldn't say a step further on in regard to yourself, but he was just about to get picked for the tour, so he's very, very close. And it was that day they knocked on his door and said, basically, take this little red pill, it'll make you feel a lot better. Yeah. It'll help you recover.
He was a lot further on than me. He was a lot better than I was.
And he just crossed that line. So you've raced against him as well.
I have raced against him, yeah.
What year was that? Or where was that?
Well, I've raced against him for a few years. So he was racing in America the year I was racing there. And then he was racing the year then I was in Belgium. He was in Belgium. And then sort of when I kind of stopped racing in Europe, I kind of stopped altogether for a little while. And then I restarted racing back in the UK and was pro then for the rest of the time I was racing properly in a UK pro team. So he'd ridden the Tour of Britain a few times that I'd done it then as well. So
So when you came back from Europe, so that would be, what would that be, 97, 96, 97?
No, I came back in, so I did 96, 97, 98 in Europe, and then after that was it.
I remember 97, you probably don't remember more because it's a highlight of the small bit of cycling I did when I went to the Island Games in 97. I remember travelling down there, and you were coming straight from Belgium.
Right.
And arrived, and I think you just wiped the floor with everyone and went back. But, I mean, funnily enough, we have not talked about the Island Games, so talk about the Island Games. I presume you probably got the most medals on the island for the Island Games. I assume you
I know I did have, and I'm terrible on stats. And I do get asked these things all the time. John Wattie's the best one. He asks me all about the stats all the time, and I have absolutely no idea. So
do you know how many you've been to?
No. All right. I've been, so I know the first ones I did were 87 in Guernsey, and then the last time I competed was, oh no, I've stumped myself now. When was the last ones I actually rode? Bermuda, I think.
Okay.
So that's the last ones I competed in. And then I've been to the ones after that as team manager.
Yes. Swim between all those competing. You went to a lot of them. I know I was there in 95. You weren't there in 95 because you're obviously racing in America at that time. So winning 1 or 2 medals at, I don't know, you must be looking at 20th. I just imagine a drawer at home you open up and just this pile of silverware in there.
Ashley's got the numbers.
Right.
I know I've never, so out of all the ones I did, I think I've got a funny feeling I've done about 10 of the things or something like that. But I never lost the time trial, so that's my kind of claim to fame out of them. So anytime I ever rode the time trial, I never lost it.
Right. I remember when we rode in, hung on the back in Jersey. It's funny because I'm terrible with names, but I always remember, and I'm going to pronounce it wrong, but I can't pronounce his name. Ramanik, was that his name?
It's Rhyme.
Yeah.
Or the big name sort of when I was doing them would have been...
it's that name you're going to say.
That's the one.
Yeah.
Not Carlos Reese, because that's...
Yeah, no, he's the Shetland. Yeah, he's the tester, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah. I just remember him because he was from one of the... I use the word Russian islands, but I'm trying to think of the name of the island now.
Not Estonia.
Yeah, I can't remember. It'll come back to me.
I can't.
I remember him being strong as a 20 men as well.
Yeah, I mean they're still a strong nation every time they come to the games, and they're kind of quite a good group of guys. And I don't know if they've ever had a women's team.
Ranimar is his name, isn't it? Idmak Ranimar or something like that. Something like that. Yeah.
But they'll drive to every Island Games they do. It doesn't matter where it is.
Oh, really?
They'll drive there. Yeah, they just take it.
They weren't in Bermuda, surely.
Not Bermuda.
That's an odd drive.
I don't think they did Bermuda, actually.
Right.
But they'll just launch everything into the back of a van and off they go. It takes them about a week to get to the games usually.
Oh, right. Yeah, hard men. That's what I remember about them.
Yeah.
So when you finished, I was going back to the question I was going to ask before. When you left Europe, did you leave it with 2 fingers up, screw this?
Yeah. So I stopped. So I knew kind of what I was up against. I wasn't doing it, and I just couldn't compete. You know, like I said, I could pull off the odd result here and there. I was finishing front group occasionally in some races, but it was ridiculous. Guys weren't even breathing, basically. Mm-hmm. You know, you'd be breathing out your ears and they were hardly even breaking a sweat.
I think just on that, going back to the thing I was talking earlier about the 97 tour. So 93, this kind of starts to infiltrate. Laurent Fignon talks about, I think, in his book, where in 92, 91, he's obviously a very good pro nearly. Well, did he win the tour? He certainly got beaten just by the tour as well. And within 2 years, he was on climbs. People that he was kicking the ass off were just getting rid of him.
Yeah.
And they talk about the margin of the first and last place in the tour previously. There might be like 5% in time difference between them. And they reckon the EPO gives about a 10% boost. So you're looking at, if you're 5% better than someone already, you add 10, you're 15% better, which is just another ballpark.
Oh, it was, yeah. I mean,
this isn't marginal gain drug use.
No, it's not marginal gain. It's big time.
Yeah.
I mean, I know definitely. I would kind of call him a friend. So one of my teammates from way back anyway. So I know he was taking EPO and he would outright say it himself. Mm-hmm. But I remember asking him, I says, what is the difference? You tell me. So I remember him saying, basically imagine yourself trying to go as hard as you can possibly go over the most mountainous route that you can think of. And he says, you can't even hurt yourself. He says, you can just go as hard and even harder and nothing hurts.
Right.
So that's the difference.
Well, that's what, and again, we were talking about just before, I was watching a 96 tour with Bjarne Riis, who was quite a big unit back then for a climber, and just massive gear, rode away from guys on the climb, doesn't even look like he's breathing.
Yeah.
That, I think I was saying that his nickname then was it's called 60%, so you've got red blood cell count, which I think for standard kind of around the 40 to...
Yeah.
And I think the limit is if your red count cells over 50%, it's something sniffy's going on. And I think the biological passport maps that, I guess, over time. Is that what that does? Yeah.
Yeah.
And his was 60.
Yeah. Yeah. Waking up with, basically sludge for blood, basically.
Yeah. I know, well, I won't mention there, but I've heard stories of people where in the night they've been running up and downstairs trying to thin the blood, in essence, to stop them having a heart attack.
That's it.
Which just, when it goes back to being scared about taking drugs, you're just like, I can even go to sleep thinking I might not wake up. And there's obviously many horror stories of, young amateurs trying to make it who've died of heart attacks.
Well, yeah, I mean, the scary part is, like you say, when I was racing there, we were only a small team. We didn't have the luxury of having team doctors and everything else, and there was people just doing this stuff themselves. They were getting hold of it and just whacking it into themselves, kind of guesstimating how much to put in. And there were people just dying. You know, there was a lot of people dying from it.
Again, you'd have thought as a governing body there'd be. I don't know.
They didn't know. They couldn't detect it then, though. There was no test for it.
No, but you'd have still thought there'd have been. They may have been up front, because I'd certainly watching cycling back then. Never felt the governing body was saying, "We think there's drug use going on." I'm pretty sure. I don't know whether they can say that type of thing, but people are dying. These irregular things are happening, and the cycling community, the racers are being quiet about it. But
even then, like with the. I'm just still using that example of being in the changing room doing it. If they know what's going on, I know it's easy looking back and just telling them to do their job, but go and just random inspections, or was anything like that ever happen? Like, some governing body will come in and just check the bags, or some kind of like
99. I think that happened, didn't it?
That did come in. That's why guys started getting busted. These random kind of room inspections and stuff like that. So you go back to your David Miller time, and that's what happened to him basically. He eventually got busted by getting raided by the police, but that came in much later.
What I want to track back to, two things I want to track back to. 92 actually, which I didn't know. You were second in the Manx International. So that was, again, back in those days, people slightly older like us will remember Cycle Week, where it was a week-long festival really of cycling, and it was a very big standard, high standard. International teams will come across as well to race that. So what do you remember of that in 92?
It was great. I do remember that well, actually.
So that was 3 laps of the TT course.
3 laps of the TT course. That's probably one of the best days I can ever remember having on my bike, actually. Mm-hmm. So I felt absolutely I knew I could win that race when I was riding it. So straight away rolling down from the quarter bridge, I knew I could win it. And it's just one of those days you feel you'll kind of know both of you yourselves riding.
The odd one,
you just get these very rare days when you feel absolutely amazing, and they are rare. So
it's like free EPO.
It's
bright. Imagine that's what it's like, though. You talk about that. Someone explained that EPO experience. I'd imagine it's you get, and much like any sports, you get those days where there's just no pain barrier. You can just ride, and you're so much stronger than normal.
So set out. Early break went in that race, as it always used to do, and I just sat with some of the bigger hitters in the bunch, kind of watching things that were trying to conserve as much as I could possibly conserve. And then we came around third lap, and I still felt great on the third lap, and I knew I had the legs to hit it hard on the third lap up the mountain, and I don't think I've ever had since. I could never say that I could do that again. Certainly couldn't do it now. So the break still had, I can't remember what the exact gap was. It was a decent gap anyway when we hit the mountain the third time up it. So it hit the third time up, it hit the gooseneck, and it just goes steep around the corner there. And I remember that's where I attacked from what was left of the group, and I caught everyone that was in the break one by one, apart from one guy that was still up the road, David Horrigan. So he was actually a good friend of mine from Ireland. Staying with my auntie as well. So there was a group of them came over from Ireland. They were all kind of staying, some with my auntie, some with me, and spread out throughout different houses and whatever. So I could see him all the way over the mountain, just kind of clawing him back little by little by little, and I just did not get him. I think he still ended up winning it by about 30 seconds in the end. And I was so disappointed, because I just knew I had the legs to get it.
He'd been in the break, I assume.
And he'd been in the break. Yeah, right. Really good bike rider. Unfortunately, no longer with us, so he ended up committing suicide, which is a sad ending to that story, isn't it? But it
was a very iconic race, and I think the trophy for the internationals, I think it's down in the NSC, isn't it?
I think it is still, yeah.
It's probably one of the biggest race that was on the Isle that we ever used to run on the Isle of Man.
Yeah, because we had the 3-lapper, the 2-lapper, and the 1-lapper within Cycling Week, which was like the big draw at that time, wasn't it? Really?
Yeah. I remember trying to do that 1-lapper that was. So and then I know we were just moving on in time there, but in '97, we can't skip over because you won the RAS.
Yeah.
And so maybe just give the listeners a description of what that event was first, just to give a context of what a result that really was.
Yeah. So the RAS, it's kind of it's Tour of Ireland, if you like, now. So that it's a race that had been on for a long time. I think it started back in the 40s or something like that. So it's probably up until it wasn't on last year, so it was like one of the biggest races within the UK and Ireland. Basically, a lot of international teams always used to come over and do it. So I was still living and racing in Belgium that year, and I wasn't even supposed to ride the race. I just had a phone call from a friend of mine, and they were looking for a rider to fill in, basically, because somebody had pulled out of the team. So I said, yeah, sure, I'm not racing that week. I'll come over and do it. So off I went, stayed in my friend's apartment, sleeping on the floor above a nightclub, which was great. So I didn't get any sleep for about 2 nights before the thing.
I think that's how Sky work and Ineos work at the moment.
Yeah.
Similar.
So yeah, I really went there intentionally just to try and win the points jersey, because believe it or not, I was sprinting quite well at the time. So that was my intention, was to try and just pick off good stage placings and come back with the green jersey. And got kind of, as days were ticking by, I wasn't really losing any time anywhere. So got towards the end of back then it was 9 days as well. So I got towards the end of the race. Took the jersey with about 3 days to go, I think it was. And it was quite close. So got the jersey, then went into a time trial stage. So I had to I was second in the time trial. So I held the jersey. And then the last stage finished with a criterium. So I was only leading by 6 seconds going into the last stage. And there was time bonuses in this criterium.
So that's City Centre kind of racing criterium.
City Centre criterium. So the guy that was lying second on GC, he was definitely a faster sprinter than I was. So I had a few friends within the bunch, and they were actually taking the sprints for me. So they were that's how I suppose favors pay off, if you like. So you know, it was a close battle in the end. So I pipped. I think I got one of the time bonuses, and then that sealed the race for me. So yeah, it was brilliant. You know, really good feeling to win.
Would that be one of your biggest results?
It probably is, really. Yeah. Didn't kind of realize it at the time, because I suppose you're always looking for something bigger. But yeah, you know, I still kind of look back at that and really enjoyed the race. Kind of
those yellow jerseys in a drawer with your Isle medal somewhere, aren't they?
That one's actually on the wall.
Oh, right,
stuck that one on the wall. So
I remember a story. I always remember. I think the following week, I remember reading a letter that Richard Fletcher had written into Cycling Weekly, saying basically, why the F haven't you put anything in your magazine about this? About you winning the RAS, because obviously it was a UK focused magazine primarily, Cycling Weekly, and then the following week, I think it was either centre spread, but and you in the time trial picture of that can still picture now. It looks like you're going up a rise. You've got the little bars that used to clip on. I think on that
spinacci bars,
little spinacci bars in your yellow jersey. And I always remember this picture, and I think I had Richard's either letter there or on the following page. It just said, "Look, a British guy's just won this. Can we have a bit more coverage, please?"
Yeah. Yeah, the time trial was horrible. It finished up basically like finishing up something about as steep as Crellin's Hill, but it's called the Butts, the climb, and it's about a mile long. I think it's horrendous. So you
got to time your effort.
Yeah, and
I didn't
do that very well.
All right, okay. Were you always good at time trialing? Was that?
I suppose it was really. It was strangely, it's not part of the sport that I enjoy doing. I never have enjoyed doing a time trial, just because you have to hurt yourself so badly to do it, don't you? But I could always ride a good time trial. But certainly didn't enjoy doing them.
Which is, as an observer, I wouldn't say a bit of coat, because you're a small lad, you know, more of a climber type of stature.
Yeah.
Typically, time trialers, testers are usually of a bit bigger build.
Well, they are, yeah. I mean, definitely.
So you just had that all-round skill.
Yeah, I mean, like I say, I keep going back to it, but the way sport has changed, somebody my build now would definitely not be a good time trialist. You know, it's all about the numbers, and I do not have those kind of numbers to stick out a good time trial, basically.
Now, do you mean, or do you think if you were
now
if you were 21 now?
Well, yeah, like our time period that we're in now, era to era, sport is always different, which is why, I never really tried to. Well, you can never compare somebody from now back to somebody from 1980 or whatever. Training methods have changed hugely. Science and data now drives, what people do in sport. And, if you don't have those numbers nowadays, basically you don't have the engine in the first place to perform.
So on that data and science, then back in those, even when you're racing in Europe, then was there much science behind, or was it just ride bike race?
There was like zero.
Still zero, even at that level. Even at
the top end, there was no science, no parameters.
Science around drug taking. That's about it.
Well, I mean, I suppose it'll give the drug side of it a hard time. Definitely, if I kind of look at that objectively, then I kind of know what was happening then, and I would say 90% of the guys were all doing the same thing. So really, it was a level playing field in a sense. There was some of us who weren't doing it, but you can discount us and everybody else at that top end of it. We're all doing the same thing. So still, the best guy won, really. It's like Lance Armstrong, so that this will divide opinion, but I still think he's the best tour rider that's ever been. Basically, so all the 7 tours that he won, I highly doubt he was doing anything different than the rest of the guys that he was competing against.
I think that's his when you listen to him. And for those that haven't seen it, there's a documentary on the BBC, like a 3.5 hour one, split into a couple of episodes, which kind of plots the whole cycling from his early career through, and talks to him, but also talks to people that he's also fallen out with, that he kind of betrayed. That there was a lot of fallout from the situation, and I think he strongly believes that ultimately he trained harder than anyone else, worked harder than anyone else. Everyone else, you look at the results of the 7 he lost, you look at the majority of the places behind him have all been caught doing drugs.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean the ones that haven't weren't, but so generally, he was still the best, irrespective of what he was putting down.
I think that's kind of how, like I say, different eras within different sport, not just cycling, but all sports, basically. So you go back to the 80s, guys may have been doing whatever they were doing, certainly not the same as it was in the 90s. It's very difficult to compare different times to whatever. Like nowadays, I think I would certainly hope things are very clean. Like I say, everything's very scientific. Guys and girls train so much differently. It's really scientific. So they are just absolutely on their limits. They're on their human performance limits, basically doing what they're doing. But that's all. It's all monitored so well, and people know their bodies so well that they are just that good.
Again, as an observer, sadly look often at results, and you feel cynical when you look at them, and when kind of someone, even take the guy won the Tour this year, not a massive proven track record. I'm not implying anything, but sadly just haven't gone through that era, and he's asked questions about drug taking, and it's a shame because it just casts this shadow over the sport and people's performance. And I suppose when you've gone through it, it just leaves this kind of mentality often when you see stuff that you just because it's just a distrusting, isn't it? It's just distrust of the sport, which is sad, really sad.
But that's that's up to the individual watching the sport, I think.
That's on me. Don't get me wrong.
Definitely.
Yeah, completely.
Certainly this year I've watched the Tour, and I would never have that thought at all. I really do think every single one of those riders, they're just there's so much knowledge and data that's out there these days. Basically, they're just like machines. They know exactly what they can do they know their capabilities, basically. If you look at, I'll use Froome as an example, basically on the climbs, he's just staring at his parameter. A lot of them don't use that to that extent, but some of them, they know how hard they can ride, and they'll hit that limit and they'll just stay there, basically.
But wouldn't the ways or the science behind trying to cheat in whatever way, blood or anything like that, do you not also think that may have improved as well? That I guess that's always the argument, is that the science behind cheating is always ahead of the science trying to catch the cheating.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, that argument is certainly there, and you could well be right. I don't know the answer to that one. I would definitely think science is trying its best to keep up with whatever may be out there that people can cheat with. So, and then the one thing that I'll always look at, and not just in sports, so people in life in general, basically, if someone is going to cheat, they're going to cheat, basically. So that could be somebody in business, somebody in sport, people in marriage, whatever it is. If you're, if your view is you're going to cheat and win at all costs, then whatever walk of life you're in, that's
the reality. It happens in every form of life, in every form. That's why we have rules, regulations, and everything else.
And that's why you kind of hope, with those rules and regulations and all the testing that is in place, that it is a deterrent to people, especially nowadays, just because testing is so much better and it's done so, very regular, basically, that in order to cheat, you're going to get caught, basically. It would be a massive risk nowadays, I would have thought, to take that chance. It's just, there's just too many hoops you'd have to jump through to get away with it.
It's interesting you mention about that, not having that thought process, and I do, and I don't believe, I have no reason to believe, I just, I don't know, feel, because I've been burnt by it, that there's just this cynic at times when you're like, not very often, but it's just always kind of rumbling there, and you don't have that, having also lived it as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I've just been an observer of it.
Yeah.
That you're maybe, I was going to say maybe too trusting, because that's not fair on the guys who I'm sure aren't, and the girls that aren't, but yeah, just that I have that thought process, and that you don't. But
then, like you say, that's everybody's going to have a different view, which makes that's what makes life interesting, though, doesn't it? People's different views. That's what keeps everything kind of going round. And
obviously, with what you do now in regard to training and helping people as well, you've obviously got a real understanding of data, how it's implied, how it works, how people train, how people race, and obviously, if you're seeing that on the TV playing out, you can, through your knowledge and experience, you can see that. Well, that pattern works with, like you talk about Froome, that's someone just working purely to power, irrespective of what's happening around him. He's focusing on what he needs to do, which is something that just probably reaffirms what you do for, I suppose, your athletes that you train.
Yeah, I mean, like, I love the science in sport, basically. I love the old school method as well, because that's what I come from. But I love and embrace the science that's involved in it as well. I always have, really. So I remember I got a power meter basically when power meters very first came out, just because I loved
£4,000 and weighed a brick, probably.
Yeah. Sold a kidney to get one. But yeah, really embrace it, and I like working with athletes with all that data as well. It just gives you so much, so much to look at. Yeah. So that communication between an athlete, but also having the data to back it up, just builds such a good picture. And like you say, you can watch the pattern of these riders that you watch on TV or whatever, and it kind of makes sense, really, to me anyway.
Yeah, no, I agree. The one other thing, to go back to the earlier days, I remember hearing this story about you. But first, to set the scene, I don't know whether anyone's seen the Freddie Flintoff documentary on the BBC called Bulimia. It's a really good documentary. Obviously following talking about his struggles with it, which you wouldn't know, but you wouldn't expect. Now, I've spoken to a few people and they're like, really, he does have bulimia. But after I was watching that, I was thinking about cycling again. We talk about power to weight, and weight's such an important thing in cycling. Then it reminded me of the story of, I think when you first arrived in Belgium, and correct where it wasn't, remember, you were told you were too fat, which I'm sure you weren't. You went on a carrot diet.
Yeah.
So what's that story?
Well, that was, I was never told I was too fat, actually.
Right.
I'm always a bit hard on myself. Maybe that's part of my upbringing as well. So yeah, I'd done a race. I got a really hard time in a race, and I just knew I needed to lose a little bit of weight, basically. So I like I said, I'd done a year racing in America. So America has some weird and wacky ideas, don't they? So
what weight were you when you were racing before this?
I think so.
Is there something you closely monitored, your weight?
I didn't closely monitor it, but I did kind of, I suppose I monitored it enough to know exactly what I was. So I was probably 2 kilos overweight, if you like. So I remember anyway, a couple of guys who are new out in the States. So they used to do this carrot diet every year just to shed a little bit of weight. No science behind it. It was just something that they did. So they did it for a week straight, just eating carrots, nothing but carrots and water for a week.
And training.
Wow.
But really light training.
Okay.
So anyway, I thought, right, I need to lose a bit of weight. I'm doing this. So finished this stage race. So I knew I had an easy week anyway. So I did this carrot diet, and I lost 2 kilos. And like I said, no science behind it. That could have been 2 kilos of muscle for all I know. But the very next race I rode was the Ross, so it was 97. I went and did the Ross and won it.
Right.
But that, may not have any link together to whatsoever.
This is not medical advice.
Maybe I would have won it by 3 minutes if I hadn't done it.
Yeah. So this isn't medical advice.
No, not at all. Don't do this thing. But I used to get, after I did this, I remember different people caught wind of it and they were all trying it. People at home here, and they were trying it and they were doing this carrot diet. And there's a guy called Tony Paxton that'll stand out in my mind. It's always a good guy, Tony. Yeah. So he did it anyway, and he was nearly passing out. He's going to work. He was trying to train, and he was seeing stars. And so I don't think this thing's working.
Sounds all right for Paco, doesn't it? He's a legend. And was that just then literally raw carrots? You just
raw carrots.
Peel whenever you felt hungry.
I would go down to the supermarket.
Must have saved a bit of money that week, though.
Oh yeah, I mean, I was always short of money when I was over there anyway, so just eating carrots was great.
Right. And didn't go orange. You didn't go.
I don't think I did. No.
Right. There's a diet and a half. I'm not sure that's on air. Get a book for that.
Yeah.
So Europe finished. Kind of two things. I'll screw that. Back to the UK. You mentioned about a bit of a break and then went to racing in the UK.
Yeah. I came back from Europe and I was all set to completely stop cycling. I'd had enough of it, basically. I loved Belgium. Like, I actually loved living in Belgium, which is maybe, again, really quite strange. Most people don't. I was actually going to stop racing and I was going to move to Belgium just to live there, basically. So I stopped racing.
Is that as in we were saying racing still on your bike, or was it just off the...
I would have still rode my bike because I just love riding my bike. But racing was done. So, like I said, all I wanted to be was a pro bike rider. I'd kind of got to as far as I was ever going to go with it. And really, I wasn't interested in racing in any other form from there at that time. So I came back. I'd only just met Ashley at that time. So I'd moved in with her in Ireland. And I think I had 8 weeks where I did not touch a bike at all. And I was driving. Like I said, we'd only just moved in together, and I was driving her nuts, basically. So,
she's like, get out on your bike.
Yeah, get out of here, will you? So I started riding my bike again. Remember the first time I went out, I just felt the worst I've probably ever felt on a bike in my life. Got a cramp and all sorts, and I probably did about 5 miles. And then just carried on. Really. I was never going to race again. All I was doing was just riding my bike for fitness and just something to do.
When you came back to the island, did you tell people why it wasn't going to work out?
Yeah, I mean, only really people that were really close to me. I mean, I'm probably still the same now. I don't really kind of let much out. Unless it's somebody who I'm quite comfortable with, I suppose. This is probably the most I've ever kind of mentioned to it about any of this stuff. So yeah, a few people would have known, but not very many. Still to this day, probably not very many people know that I even raced in Belgium. So.
Yeah. No, sorry, yeah. You're saying you're back out on the bike. Sorry, I just wondered that coming back that... Yeah, just that process of...
Yeah.
Whether there was anger in there as well, or going, F this, F them, and this is why.
There was anger, yeah. And there was always a what if. I mean, that what if has only just gone away probably in about the last 5 years, to be honest with you, because the what if was always what if I had done it. When you see all these guys who are writing books and making good money out of it, and my biggest gripe is seeing guys commentating who I know who've done it and they're still making careers out of the sport, basically.
But do you not, I mean, it's a good point, because again, some of the guys, and Armstrong talks about that he's getting more, let's say, more accepted now. I think he's a guest presenter on some of NBC's stuff, and obviously he's got his own way through his own podcast to get his voice out there. But but one of his gripes is, I've got vilified here. Appreciating he was, by his own words, probably a bully, and because he was at the top of the tree, he probably fell the furthest.
Yeah.
But he talks about the wronk of this world, etc. Getting that, but at the same time, to take your comment before about they were just in that world, and it was just what happened. So
yeah,
why be angry with them now for just trying to get a living?
Well, yeah, I mean, why would I be angry at them?
Well, yeah, and angry is maybe not quite the right word, but
well, there was some anger, yeah. Yeah, I suppose I was never angry at them. I was always, I never finished my story, if you like. So I never knew what I could do within the sport. So that was always, like, say, if you finish doing something, you like to do it to the end of what your capabilities are, and then you leave it, and you're happy. You've got no regrets and no what ifs, basically. So I got to the end of my pro cycling career, and I don't have that. Well, that's as good as I was, and that's it. And I could still say now I have what ifs where I probably do, but it doesn't bother me anymore. But like I say, that's only recently that I don't have that now.
I'm sure they've got what ifs. I'd have guessed what happens if I hadn't taken it. What happens if I wouldn't have let my family down?
Well, the biggest thing, I've got 2 boys, 2 kids, so I have no problem. I have no issues talking to them. I don't have to lie to them. So that's my thing with them. How do they face their families, basically? And that's what I would never have been able to do that.
Yeah. It's such a fine line, isn't it? It's just on choices that, especially if you're living away, perhaps you haven't got much influences around. You have to be very strong, especially when you're chasing your dream.
Yeah,
so strong.
Definitely.
So strong. So you start riding a bit more back on the island, and when you say you're probably only ride 5 miles and get cramp, I don't believe that to the slightest.
Well, that one was. Yeah. So started riding again just for general fitness, health and fitness kind of. So living in Ireland at the time with Ashley, and then we moved back to the island. It was at the time it was cheaper to live on the Isle of Man basically than living in Dublin. Probably still is, I'm sure. So I came back here, started doing the local races just for a bit of fun. And then I kind of started really enjoying doing the racing again, really. So I was doing local races, went away on a few trips with the guys to do like Tour of Ulster and stuff like that. But again, it was only ever really for a bit of fun, more for the trip than the race. But realised I was going well, but not really by trying to go well, if you like. So then kind of put more effort into it, got asked to ride for Pinarello Pro Team, so Phil Griffiths at the time. So thought, why not? I'll give this another go. And then...
was that paid as well? Was that paid?
So it was UK Pro Team at the time. So when you say paid, again...
Expenses.
Not great.
Yeah.
compared to now, dribs and drabs, but nothing amazing.
And then work in between.
Yeah,
doing a bit of work with you.
That's the thing. So when I was racing, I think I did 6 or 7 years racing with the UK Pro Team, but I worked that whole time as well. Strangely, so I was working again with my dad. So I came back from Belgium, went back working with my dad, fitting alarms and security cameras and all that sort of thing. So I was doing that in the day, going training, and then trying to race as a UK pro. And I could actually do it. And when I look back at that, I kind of think I was a bit stupid there, really, because I should have just knocked 2 years on the head and said, right, I'll go full on at this. Because I got an offer to ride on Post as well, so the Sean Kelly team. And I wasn't interested in going back to Europe again, so I turned that down. I just said, nah, not interested in it, thanks. But I suppose I could have done that, and just quit my job for 2 years and maybe had another crack at seeing where that might go. But
what was the reason for saying no? Is that not wanting to go back into that world again?
I knew that world was not as bad at that time. Definitely things had cleaned up. But our 2 boys, they were maybe 2 years old or something like that at the time, and life had changed. That part of my life was done. I wasn't really, I wasn't that fussed about being a pro bike rider anymore, really. Although I was, in a sense, a pro bike rider in the UK, but I didn't see that as, in my own mind, I don't see that as being a pro bike rider. I still don't, to be honest. And don't mean offense to anybody who is a pro rider in the UK, but it's not the same as being a full-on pro rider.
Ultimately, it's a stepping stone, really, isn't it, to people's onward goal of becoming a pro.
Yeah, it's a stepping stone.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
Doesn't make it.
So that's how I seen it for me. You know, I was doing it, although I was classed as a pro on a UK team. You know, I was doing it. It was more for pleasure, really.
Yeah.
And I enjoy the challenge. So that's one of my biggest reasons about doing the sport, if you like, is just that challenge. You know, pushing yourself, seeing what you can do, seeing what your body can do. And that's what.
And those days on the UK team, I think power meters were starting to appear around that time. Would you say? I'm thinking like this is early 2000s. That was the Armstrong era, and he was kind of bringing that into the sport from what I recall. Well, not bringing it in, but he was using that kind of outside of everything else he was using.
Yeah,
bringing that in, that kind of stuff into it. Is that when you started to use that type of data or get that type of data?
Definitely. Yeah, there's definitely more power meters being used. Training definitely was becoming far more scientific. So, you know, training was structured then. It wasn't just a matter of going out and riding your bike. You would go out and you would work with a coach, or you would do your own kind of structured program yourself. And it's, you know, obviously it stayed like that ever since, even more so now.
Did you have a coach back then?
I did, actually. So when I was racing then, so when I came back to the UK to race, I actually did get a coach. And for me, that helped, just because basically I had structure to work with, so I didn't have to think about it. I probably could have done my own, but I'd rather have, because I was concentrating on the racing, somebody else kind of worried about the coaching aspect of it, and I actually liked it.
And to just again step back a little bit, when so in '98, I think it was the Festina affair, which was Team in the Tour. So we talked about the doping earlier and going on. The cars got raided. They found a load of EPO. When you'd obviously left the European scene by then, what was your view when that was happening? Not how hard I've caught with you, but
yeah,
I knew I knew this even would happen. What were you thought? Oh, here's an opportunity for the sport to clean up. What was the?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose if I look back at that, you know, it's only good things really. You know, you kind of think, well, it's great that the sport is catching up with what's going on, and you know, and they're trying to eradicate all the badness within it. And it certainly did. From then to where we are now, I think it's cleaned up a hell of a lot, really.
For sure.
Definitely. And that's great, you know, if you look back to even then, so youngsters coming into the sport in 98, 99, 2000, at least you could kind of be more comfortable with them going to teams and thinking, okay, well, they're, you know, they will get looked after.
Yeah. Certainly looking at, okay, he's no reference point, but when you look at Armstrong and he talks about using it through, he won it from 99 to 05 maybe.
Yeah.
But I get the impression as an observer of the sport that kind of 05, that it was really, really clamped down on. You know, they found a test for EPO, although you could still microdose, I believe, and get away with it. But there was this flattening of that abuse. Yeah. I guess.
Yeah.
I think because because EPO was such a massive boost, it was so noticeable again. I was watching something earlier and it was saying, so 98, they bust Festina, they kicked them out. A few other teams got sent home and kicked out. And then the following year, there's commentary when Armstrong was this new era, they called it, comes into cycling, post-drugs. Yet the whole tour was faster than the previous year, where everyone had been on drugs. And it's only really, I'm sure that people thought about it at the time, but in hindsight, you're like, how naive were we all, really?
Well, yeah. But then if you look at that, so like the speed of racing, so go back to Armstrong's time, basically. They're going faster now, but for sure it's clean because the training methods have changed. The way they were training then, yes, they were doing structured stuff, but now everything is absolutely, you know, thought out to the absolute precision measurement, basically, and the training is meticulous, basically.
Yeah, and I think looking back in 99, 2000, I suppose there probably was chat about that, and I think it was justified. Partly the rationale where he was very structured around what he did. He was very focused. It was very, you know, he was looking at aerodynamics a lot more than that was the start of what we see now, really.
Yeah.
And I suppose it was used as a rationale for why things were going quicker, which maybe I'm sure that was part of the reason.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
So in racing in the UK, results that kind of stand out during that period for you?
Well, racing
it's a
in
quiz
the UK,
as well, because I've got some notes.
Oh, okay. You might have all my results then, because I never remember them. So, well, I suppose the thing I liked about racing in the UK, so racing for Phil Griffiths, he was a good guy, probably, I'm sure still is. I haven't been in touch with him for a little while. But the team I was with, so I was raced with Russ Downing for a number of years, Malcolm Elliott for a number of years, all on the same team. So both really good riders. And I enjoyed more so I rode for Russ quite a lot, so he could win races, he could sprint, he could do pretty much anything in the UK scene. And I, loved doing that. If I could help him win a race, I'd be happier doing that than me trying to win a race, basically. Right. But that's like pro cycling, it's not an individual sport, it is a team sport. So I was better suited to riding to help somebody else win a race than me try to win a race. Because I could maybe finish 5th or 6th, but he could win, so we're better off trying to make him win.
Right. And during that time in the UK, we talked about the Island Games earlier, would you always try and work with the UK guys, say, look, I really want to race for the Isle of Man, this week I need 3? Was that always a driver for you? Yeah,
I suppose that's one of the beauties I had on that team. I did have flexibility within them, so stuff like that, if I said I wanted to do the Island Games, they were fine with it, right. Really. So long as it didn't clash with anything too major, big, which it never really did, then I was always okay.
So looking here, like results, sort of 04, 05, Tour of Munster, Tour of Art, Tour of Ulster, those type of memories. 3rd on stage 1. The Girvan 3-day?
Oh,
I think that was a premier race, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So your closest win to, do you want to talk through your closest? So I believe winning a Premier Calendar, which is the top elite UK series, that was one of your ambitions. And you got very close in one of them. What happened at the end of that particular event?
That's probably the Archer, is it? Is that what
no, I was thinking is it called Sickly, where you have a slow puncher?
So the Sickly Classic, that's the one with the off-road sections.
Right.
Yeah, so that, again, that was one of those days where everything felt spot on. Thought, I can win this. Felt good. I was actually riding for the Isle of Man that year, and was that the same year Cav rode? I'm trying to think now. Possibly the same year Cav rode. Anyways, so felt great. It was the first year that race was ran, and they ran it on some absolutely horrendous off-road sections. I mean, you really needed a mountain bike. They weren't suitable for a road bike. It has changed slightly. They've taken some of the sections out. But it's a great race. Basically, you're racing, I suppose, on what you would use a gravel bike nowadays on. Just beating up lanes, farm tracks, through farm fields. Right. Still use it today. It's one of the best races in the UK for sure still. So anyway, getting towards the finish of that, and again, I was sprinting well that year, and I thought I'll win this in a sprint. That's I was confident enough to think that in my own head, basically. So went for it in the sprint. Had a slow puncture, but I didn't realize that the puncture was quite as bad as it was. So went into the last corner, and the back tire just squelched into the ground. And if you ever watch a high side in a motorbike race, that's basically what I did. Wow. So just high sided off the bike and absolutely came crashing down, smashed my collarbone, and that was that, done. And I could just, as I'm sprinting, I could see myself winning the race, and then next thing I know, I'm lying on the floor, getting stretchered off.
Did you say you busted your collarbone?
Yeah. Right. So one of 6 times that I've done it. Yes.
Oh, right. Okay. All right. Is this why you mates with Cal? Because you can relate to your collarbone breaking incidents?
Yeah.
And so you mentioned the Archer then. What was that one?
Another sort of close call in a Premier, if you like. So in the break all day long, and then I wasn't feeling great actually. So I was flagging at the end, but the whole break was, and I attacked on the run in. So probably about maybe 6 or 7 miles from the finish. Got away, had a good gap, and you hit this little drag probably maybe 2 miles before the finish, hit this little drag, and all of a sudden my legs just went bang. And I got caught again by the rest of the break. and then hung on. Eventually finished. I was second, or was I third? Second or third. That's how good I am at remembering
third.
results.
Yeah,
Third.
reading on
There you
here
go.
is third. Yeah.
So third. And the funny thing is, so the two team managers who were following behind, so Pinarello at the time and Plowman Craven. So my team manager and his team manager apparently had quite a substantial bet on who's going to win this race, following behind, and I ended up losing the race and costing him a good whack
blaming
of
you.
Yeah.
And when you look back at, because again, just looking through the results here, every 2 years the Island Games are appearing. You've been to, many years, sort of looking from a competitor side of point. Well, two questions, I suppose, from a competitor now to a team manager. What gives you more satisfaction? And then, certainly in racing wise, what's your favorite? Have you got a favorite memory from those years?
Well, yeah. Regards what gives me more satisfaction, definitely coaching or team manager now for sure. I get, even if I compare it to what I was doing when I was racing, I think now I far prefer seeing athletes who I coach achieve their goals, if you like. I get more out of that than I ever did out of a race. I think I could never, when I was racing, I could never accept achievement. Even if I achieved something good, I'd never kind of accept it. But now if I watch somebody else do it, I think
you can pat yourself on the back.
Oh, well,
for your work, though.
Really, I love seeing them achieve what they want to achieve and just the excitement that they get out of it. And I feel,
why couldn't you pat yourself on the back?
Don't know. I'm still like that now. If I achieve something now, I just don't really. Don't know. I don't have an answer for that. I can't really. I find it hard giving myself praise, if you like. But seeing somebody else achieve, massive praise for them. Love seeing that. And so yeah, definitely coaching gives me far greater.
And memory wise from racing the Island Games.
I
take you've been a flag bearer at the Island.
I have, yeah. Been flag bearer for the Island Games, flag bearer for the Commonwealth Games once as well. So Island Games, geez, that's a tricky one actually.
So many memories. That's the problem.
Yeah.
So many gold medals. And
Scotland was probably one of the ones I remember quite well. That would be.
Is that because the beer was so expensive?
Yeah.
Apparently. So I'm glad you mentioned the flag bearer. So went to the Commonwealth Games in Delhi, which we were just saying before we came on air. We're recording this in October now. That it was 10 years ago, which probably is a shocking amount of time gone so quickly. So what do you remember about that? I mean, looking back, not normally, but as an Ireland team, we'll go to the games, and the idea is to get the experience and medals on. Always, they are more so in cycling, I guess. But you go there with Cav, who's now on the world scene. How was that? I mean, how was that experience? One for yourself, and then you're tasked with a job to,
Well, Commonwealth Games. I've done 7 Commonwealth Games. Right. So if you go back to Delhi, I mean Delhi, Cav.
Well, go back to them all. Yeah, by all means.
Well, I'll go into Delhi. Obviously, we had Cav on the team, and Cav was, one of the, as he always is, one of the big hitters in the race, and we were definitely objective of the race was to get him over the line first, basically, and being the course the way it was pan flat, totally made for him to win it. And as I say, cycling is a team sport, and so Cav kind of laid out the game plan. He wanted us to ride. So if you watch whatever they do on the television, basically they're riding on the front and protecting Cav, basically trying to get him to the end of the race. So he convinced us that we were strong enough to ride on the front for him. I knew that we weren't.
Right.
And we rode ourselves into a box, basically. And everybody on that team rode absolutely amazing, I have to say. We did do the best job that we were possibly able to do for him. We did ride brilliantly. Everybody did that day. And we got him as far as we basically could. We just could not get him to the finish line, basically, to win it. But that's just racing. We weren't a World Tour team. We were a team with guys who were racing on the Isle of Man for a start, never ride. They weren't pro bike riders, so we were up against World Tour riders.
Yeah, that. I've been one of the Island Games level riders, good Island Games riders, and you ask them to control a race with, not necessarily even like trying to control it full cap, but then you look at the other home nations of, I don't know whether Garrett Thomas was there, but the Welsh have got teams like that. The British have a number of world class athletes. Australia, it's you can understand it.
But having somebody like Cav on the team and putting his faith in us and the other guys, that's great, because they love that, and we love it. You're riding for the best bike rider in the world, and he's asking you to do a job for him. Then what better thing is there as a bike rider?
Absolutely. And even I know towards the end of that race, it's 10 years ago now, watching it on TV, and I mean, Cav was ultimately there towards the end. I think a few guys got away, if I recall.
Yeah,
and obviously, as soon as they get rid of him, everyone's working because they haven't got. They don't want to drag him to the finish.
That's it. Once he was on his own, we were all used up. Then they just keep attacking him basically, because they know he's the fastest guy in the race. So they're going to do all they can to not have him there at the finish, basically.
What time of day was it run? Because I have a recollection. Obviously, it's hot down there. Was it? Did they run at a sensible time?
I think it was kind of midday.
Oh,
it was right in the middle of the day. It was hot.
So a load of Manxies getting their skin burnt as well.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So what about other Commonwealth experiences?
Well, my best ones, like you say, use Cav as an example. So I've been lucky enough to have Cav as a teammate on a few occasions in the Commonwealth Games. Melbourne was another really good one. So Cav again riding, and I was able to stay with them there pretty much up till the death. I was able to stay with them up until the last lap. And again, when you've got him there, all you're doing is riding for him. That's it. There's no questions asked. And
you're getting bottles. You're making sure he's got enough food.
Whatever he wants, that's what you're going to do for him, basically. And but that's what I love doing. If he'd have asked, sit on the front and ride for 50k until your lights absolutely go bang, then that's what you're going to do, basically. But to have that opportunity and to have somebody at that level put his faith in you as a team, then like I said, that's as good as it gets, basically.
What year was that? It was from Melbourne?
98. Was it? No, it wasn't 98. Melbourne was 2006, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he'd have.
So
I think
he was
where
still.
He
was still kind of newer then. I think that was just before he went to High Road. I'm pretty sure it was the year before. So I think he ended up 5th in those games.
Right.
So there was, again, a little group just clipped away. And then I think he was 2nd in the bunch sprint.
Right. And it reminded me, when just talking about Cav there, and obviously his track experience. Is a track you've ever beaten racing on a track? Have you ever done track racing?
I have, yeah. I actually rode the Commonwealth Games on the track.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah,
So again, for listeners, obviously they know what the track racing is, but it is a different sport in many ways. There's obviously similarities, but the racing styles are so much different.
Yeah.
So it's not just something that you just flick on jump on another bike.
Well, that's what I did, basically.
Right.
Again, no way would you be able to do that nowadays. So it was the Commonwealth Games in Canada, so in Victoria. So we were there. I was riding the road race, and we didn't know. So just the road race, because we didn't have enough riders to do the team time trial at the time. So because we were there, I thought, I'll tell you what, I'll do the track. Let's just jump on the track and give that a go. So I did the points race and the scratch race. Didn't even do the training sessions. I just did the races.
Think yourself, don't stop pedaling.
Yeah, borrowed somebody's track bike, did both of them. Didn't get dropped. I stayed in the groups. But yeah, not something you definitely would not get away with doing that these days. It's so specialized. Even the distance races on the track is just massively specialized.
Yeah.
I didn't even know what I was doing anyway. I was lucky to be going around the right way.
That's why when you look at the skills of from like Wiggins, where he's come from a track, and Thomas, those guys that have done track stuff that then go on the road, and sometimes they're going back to the track in the winter. I know Cav's done that a few times. The ability to do that, even for a top athlete, is, I think, I've never done the track, but just to know the difference.
Yeah.
It's probably from like running, 1,500 meters to becoming a 400-meter runner.
I think so. I think
3 months later.
I think that gap's getting even bigger now. I think it's becoming so specialized. I think you could probably compare it to being like a marathon runner to a 400-meter runner, say.
Probably the nearest that I've seen being able to do it recently, Viviani, who certainly 2 winters ago was good on the road and very good on the track.
Yeah.
But, there's not many guys that can constantly do both. So, what you mentioned about racing in the UK for many years. What was there a point where you kind of just had your time and it was time to?
Yeah,
not grind, but just it's time to move on now.
Yeah, I just wasn't getting excited about racing
Right.
anymore. I'd go to I rode I think the year I knew I wasn't really gonna go any further. I rode the Tour of Britain and I rode the Tour of Ireland, and I couldn't even get nervous anymore. Basically, I could roll up to big races, and I would have.
Do you think you need to be nervous?
A good nervous, yes.
Okay.
But not a nerves to your detriment, so that you're kind of falling apart. Just that kind of nerves to kind of put you on edge a little bit and kind of just get the adrenaline going. That's a good sense, and that's there's the full kind of spectrum to that, isn't there? So, but I wasn't even getting that. I was just kind of going through the motions and just kind of had seen my day in the racing end of it. Plus, I wasn't kind of 20 years old anymore either. So, I was in bunches. Everybody around me was like 19, 20 years old, 21. I stopped. So, Glasgow Commonwealth Games was my last proper race. So that was 2014.
So that was one where Pete was away.
Yeah. So, 2014, I was, how old was I then? 14, is that right? Not 40. I mean.
6 years ago. Yeah.
Was I 40?
6 off whatever you are now.
I'm 48 now.
Yeah, it's 42. Yeah. 41, 42.
So I felt like I was racing against juniors. Basically, it just felt a bit strange. So I just had enough of it.
Would you consider that your last? Obviously, you still race locally, but last competitive race.
Yeah. So the Commonwealth Games in Glasgow, I would class as the last time I raced competitively.
Yeah.
The ones I do locally, for sure, I still,
Yeah, well, that was one of my comments. We had the closed circuit champs a few weeks ago, and you were second in that.
Yeah.
Line, a young lad now who's an amazing talent.
Yeah.
And the field full of talented riders. When you look at a situation like that, do you believe? Because it's not always about the strongest person wins. Do you think that that's racecraft that gets you to that kind of position?
That purely was racecraft.
Yeah. No, and I only say it because one of the lads I was chatting to after he said they'd not seen your race, and then it literally said he went through my mind. I've not seen Roche up this whole race. I'm going to see him in a minute. And next thing you're up the road with someone else.
Yeah.
And that's just, I guess, many years. And I haven't raced and I don't profess to have a lot of racecraft, but you see newer people in the sport. So much craft to it that you can get away with not being as fit as you potentially need to be.
Well, exactly. I mean, I suppose throughout my whole racing career, I've had to rely more so on racecraft than pure talent. I'm not that strong. My power numbers are not anything exceptional. I'm not a powerful kind of guy really. I suppose I used to be able to go up a hill quite quick. Definitely couldn't do that now. So even local races, like I'm on my limit. So
that's good to hear.
I'm definitely trying, and because I've put a number on, even though I say I do them for fun, if I've put a number on, I'm still giving it all I can. Kind of
elbows are out, and away you go.
I'm going for it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's no pressure. So if you win it or finish last, it doesn't.
Yeah, not going to keep you awake at night. To go back to I meant to ask when I was I got sidetracked by the carrot story, but the bulimia thing got me thinking then also about the power to weight and this constant. And again, when you watch the documentary, he's struggling internally in his head with his weight and his mechanisms to try and keep control of that or control it within his head. I guess cycling, because it's more and more so about a weight thing. I mean, have you ever struggled, outside of the carrot thing, but was that something that's, looking back, that maybe influence your behaviour to keep weight down, and you see that as a battle with youngsters, and you've seen, and we'll come on to the many generations that, or the couple of generations that you've seen come through now and go on to be pro. Have you seen that as not an issue, but just a battle that people have?
Yeah, I suppose I've seen it in others. I'm lucky enough, if you like, that I never really had that issue. I I've never had a problem with my weight really. Like I said, I did the carrot diet thing once, but it's just kind of some wacky.
Yeah, but it's not dominating you.
It's never
daily
dominated
thought process of I can't eat this, can't eat that.
No, I've kind of always eaten what I would consider quite healthy, and my weight has always kind of pretty much stayed constant. Even now, I'm probably the same weight now, within a kilo or so that I used to be when I was racing. But I'm just extremely lucky in that, and kind of I know that. But I have seen it definitely in others where they'll obsess about their weight, definitely with younger riders. And I think that's just the culture that they're in, really, which is not really, well, it's definitely not a healthy environment to be in.
And it must be a fine balance, whether they're, I won't say athletes you're training, but dealing with or chatting to or mentoring, that numbers are so important now to it that kilo does change that number. So you can understand why it becomes, I think about my weight at times when it's not remotely important in the scheme of things. I don't even do anything other than enjoy cycling, but I don't know whether you're the same, Matty. It's a thought process that's probably too common in my head for someone who's doing it for a hobby.
Yeah, definitely.
So I think someone who's doing it full time or has got goals, that it can become an obsessive issue.
Yeah. No, I agree. I see it on my favourite Swift. I say everything's number based, everything like that. Especially when it comes into silly like algorithms, and you want to try and get a 1K. I know you can relate it to the Saudi, trying to get 1K, 2K. So your numbers a little low, so your powers can go to 6, so the numbers look better. And I've seen and heard lots of people on that side that have just been far too to their detriment concerned.
Yeah, it does feel like the sport, like cycling, is a real head F of a game.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I'm sure a lot of sports are. I'm sure most of them are.
Yeah, but as I'm sure, like you say, every sport, the mental aspect of it is probably far outweighs the physical aspect of it. Definitely.
And it's a question I was going to ask earlier when you were talking about attacking in that race. When you raced, could you talk about being in the mindset, I can win this? Was there many a racing where it'd be the opposite, and you'd have, and again, we talked about in others podcasts about mental health. I'm not saying necessarily mental health, but that internal battle. Did you have that? Because again, as an outsider, you've always, whenever I've seen you race, it's just this unflustered, calm, super strong guy that seems to not have any lack in confidence. But was there that during your career?
Oh yeah, I mean, I've definitely had lack in confidence. I suppose if I had to kind of run through what goes in my head in a race, I'd probably that will have changed a lot. So definitely earlier, then confidence would have been a big one. But that's quite normal, when you're younger. Then I think most people would generally think, "Geez, I'm up against it here. Look at all these good guys that are around me." And as you mature, you kind of grow to know how to deal with that, if you like. So definitely latter years, or even now, if I do an event, I'm brutal with myself in my own head. Like I'm kicking my ass in my head, basically.
Yeah.
So I'm telling myself to go faster, and why am I why are you struggling? You shouldn't be struggling.
Why did I miss that? So if you was a break up the road, would you be in your head? I've missed that. I'm punishing yourself in your head.
Yeah.
No, that's good. It's not just me then.
Yeah.
Not that I could have gone with it, but that.
Well, yeah.
You miss a break or you miss a split, and it's just you only need a momentary lapse in concentration or thought, or I'll give it a second, and suddenly it's gone.
Yeah.
And you just.
But that's kind of the part of the sport that I like. I like that kind of uncertainty in the sport, that kind of getting the tactical decisions, like really quick thinking. Even our local races, there's a lot of moves going backwards and forth, attacks going here and there, and it's kind of weighing all that up within your head and quick thinking,
decisions.
Quick decisions, and trying to choose the right one, if you like. But I love that part of the sport. That's the raw part of it, which you don't really see in pro racing nowadays. If you watch it on television, it's all kind of getting dictated through radios and what have you. But that just somebody says, "I'll tell you what, I feel good. I'm going to attack you." It may make absolutely zero sense whatsoever, but they've just felt good and they're going, and that's kind of great to see.
It does feel a bit more. I mean, we watched the World Champs a few weeks ago, and I'm sure Anna Philippe had an idea of where he was going to attack, but it did feel fairly raw.
Yeah, I think the Worlds is one of those exceptions where
probably small teams kind of and the dynamics of it.
Yeah, they're not riding with their normal trade teams, so their director they may never have worked with that person before. So the director and the rider quite often probably don't really know each other very well.
Yeah.
So the rider's using his own nous to think a little bit more in the worlds.
So when we look at the Isle of Man and the talent it's produced, obviously there's a few names or a number of names that stand out. When you look back over that, I mean, we obviously know the Cavs and the Peats that have done, and continue to do amazingly well. What other maybe talents that never quite had the opportunities that you stand out for you, that from the outside of myself, obviously?
Yeah,
that stand out. Because there's I was writing names down. I remember reading an article years ago. Cav was getting interviewed, and he mentioned Joe Kelly as just an amazing talent who could go so deep.
Yeah.
But using that, not Joe as an example, that kind of names that maybe didn't quite reach the pinnacle.
Well, yeah, I mean, you said one there, Mark Christian. So Mark,
right.
He's definitely a good enough bike rider to be racing World Tour, but just those opportunities kind of haven't fallen his way, basically. There's nobody any better than him. He won the King of the Mountains in the Tour of Switzerland, yet he's not riding World Tour. So how does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, him, you got Anna Christian. So Anna Christian, again, she's good enough to be riding World Tour women's racing, as is Lizzie Holden. Both of them, both exceptions, but they're still young enough to hopefully make that grade as well.
Is there any names not riding now that you look back?
Joe. Joe unfortunately had a bad accident. That probably ended his days. As the way sport is, very brutal.
Is that Joe or Jake?
Well, both actually.
Yeah,
so they both came through the academy.
Yeah.
Both good enough to get on the academy, but it's just that kind of filter system. Either you make the grade or you're hoofed out the other end of it. But I'm just trying to think. There's definitely good guys from over the years. You could go back to even further back than that, sort of Steve Porter's days and stuff, way back then, where again there wasn't a lot of opportunity, but good enough. He was second in the Manx International as well.
Right.
I think he was 8th in one of the Commonwealth Games that we did in New Zealand. I think he was 8th possibly. But guys from that far back.
Yeah. Burgers.
Burgers, yeah, definitely.
The legend is Burgers. And looking back now at Cav, at that, when you saw him as a younger lad, did you see talent there? I mean, he talks about it in his books and openly talks about that he was. When you talk about numbers were never his thing.
No.
And that he struggled, I think, on the academy earlier years because it was becoming number focused, and he believed enough in what he could do. But that numbers. Did you see that talent at a young age?
Well, funnily enough, so I remember Cav when he was really young. He used to come out with us on the Sunday group rides, and he'd get belted out the back every time the road went about 1 degree uphill, basically. And I thought, who's this guy? He's thinking useless. So I never actually really thought that much of him when he was young, but that's just because he was young, People don't develop until certain ages or whatever. So, but he went on to the academy, and I honestly don't think he was a super exception physically. His strength is in his head. He just wanted it so bad. He wanted to be the best bike rider in the world and believed that he could be. And I really think that's what got him to where he is.
It's again, looking at that sort of his era, the pathway, when we chatted to Christian, it was just starting to, I think they were one of the first two on the academy process. But again, you go back just before that, and that pathway isn't there to have that belief and desire. So it's much like yourself 15 years earlier. It's quite hard to see when that pathway's not there.
It is, yeah. Like you say, Cav and Christian were the first ones on the academy that year, and Geraint, I think, as well was. Yeah. So they were like the guinea pigs of it, basically. And I'm sure it was an extremely kind of hard lifestyle back then, because even the people running the academy then probably didn't really know what they were doing, or what was to be expected. Yeah. So, but like I say, Cav, I know Cav quite well, and if you say you can't do something, he'll prove you wrong for sure.
Yeah. If you look back at his career, I say look back like it's over, but you look at that now, what would a highlight of his career be for you in as a friend of watched him grow up? And
Probably when he first won Milan San Remo. That was an outstanding one, really. Definitely, all the stage wins he's had in Tour and the likes, but I think Milan San Remo is the one that stands out for me, really. Just because of the race that it is. Like for me, that's one of the biggest races that I always kind of held, high regard. So anybody that could win that was like one of the best guys in the world when I was growing up, if you like.
Yeah, if you Google the end and watch the end of that, I don't know whether you remember that race, Matty. He was, it was a while ago, but he was riding with HTC, and I want to say Henrik Hausler had just coming into the sprint, and kind of Cavs, I suppose, some ways favourite, albeit it's earlier in his career and it's a long race, that one, and typically it's more the kind of, let's call them mature older riders because they've got more miles in their legs. Correct me anyway where I'm wrong, because they've seen better than me. And then Henrik Hausler jumped with a certain, maybe half a K to go and had a good gap. And the sprinters were all eyeing each other up. Well, there wasn't many sprinters left, really. Who was left? And Cav and he's talked about it when Matty and I went to a bike show in London just last year. Cav happened to be on there. And I think he was talking about it because he talked about his 5 favourite sprints. And he was saying just this instinct in him was like, I need to go. And outside of him being one of the best sprinters in the world, he had a 50, 60 metre gap to close as well.
Yeah.
And there's a picture of him dipping him on the line.
I think that's where I remember seeing.
Yeah, and I don't know whether Hausler's ever got over that.
He probably hasn't. No.
I know. I'm trying to think back I always remember a stage. It still makes me chuckle now when it was Armstrong era, and they went across I think it was that roadway that covered in water for 3/4 of the day.
Yeah.
And there was crosswinds that day.
Yeah.
And there was these side winds, and I think US Post put the hammer down. So as in they went really hard to split it.
Yeah.
And he got in the front group with Armstrong. There was a couple of other leaders and a couple of Armstrong's team in there, and they rode to the finish, 40k or whatever, and then Cab won the sprint at the end.
Yeah.
And he was probably only third year pro, and I remember getting interviewed, and they were like, so what happened to basically all the other boys that got spat at the back? And he just went, you ride like a junior, you get a result like a junior.
Yeah.
And I just it made me chuckle on, his biggest race in the world, and it's just kind of like a comment we'd kind of make just down the local race
when he was probably only about 21 or 22 at the time.
Yeah. You ride like a junior, you get results like juniors. You look back now, look back in hindsight, but we did a podcast a few weeks ago. Have you heard it with Joe Wick?
I haven't listened to that one yet, but I know you've done that. Yeah. Cav's done some stuff with him as well.
Yeah, so it's just in you look back now and you just even now in his career where he's getting back to an element back, they took his career over. There's always this negativity around that. Is he the guy he was? But when you look back at what he did, it's just unbelievable.
Yeah,
unbelievable. The amount of stages, going to a tour and winning 5 stages in 1 year. It's just I think only once he fully retires, people will. Obviously, gets a lot of praise for it, but I think those people who. There's always that chip until you retire. I think with any athlete, it's always this one. He's not as good as he used to be. He's not. And it's only when you actually retire they go, yeah. You kind of look back.
But that's normal as well. With most athletes, generally they're not as good as they used to be because you try to get your career further and further along, sort of thing, and bring it because it's hard to stop. If that's all then. Then it's such a big life change. Then it would be extremely hard to stop, and you see it with a lot of athletes. Well, MotoGP, Valentino Rossi is 40 years old. He's still racing the motorbike, probably because he doesn't know
what to do next.
What to do if he stops. We
chatted to your black man that came in, and he similar when he ended playing Mark. What do I do now? All from the age of 14, 13, it was I want to be an All Black and did it, and then when it ends, and didn't think about it the following day. Yeah, must be hard. I know NFL players, a lot of them go bankrupt within a few years of end of sport. Cause it's like I don't know what to do. It's just
blow every penny.
It's conditioning. Yeah, it's conditioning. I guess post sport, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which I think people are getting more aware of. I guess to try and help them deal with that. So up to modern day now, you obviously race locally, but you do loads of other things as well. So first of all, let's talk about the ladies' team on the island, which is something you've really created and given that opportunity. And you can see now, I don't know how many years we're into it, but that's I want to say work in progress, which sounds disrespectful, but it's not. It's meant because it didn't really get the recognition it should. We've had, you look at like someone like Marie Purvis, Marie Noon that used to race. We've got good calibre, Lizzie, Anna. There's talent on the Isle of Man, and you've built that structure now. Again, own. You talk about giving back to athletes and giving you pleasure. So is that again something that you just obviously enjoy doing and that can see a long-term goal there?
Yeah, it's. I suppose that's strange how that ever came about. Really, it's not something that I'd ever thought of doing. It just kind of happened, really. So stopped racing, started taking teams away and managing Island Games teams. And I suppose it was probably the first Island Games I was at in Jersey. So Lizzie was the only female we had on the team, and I just kind of thought, just in the back of my head, this isn't right. Something's missing here. This needs to change. So kind of from then, really, I just wanted to give more opportunity for them to have something to aspire to. So, and it has built. So that's been, I suppose, since it kind of got involved with that more so, it's been going maybe 4 years, I suppose now. Well, be in their 4th year. And just trying to give them like their own community to kind of train with. So we do, group rides throughout the winter now, especially regular group rides. But it then lets other women within the sport see that there's something going on, and they can kind of join in and just keep building on those numbers. And then that little community just keeps growing and growing. So it's definitely grown quite a lot over these few years that we've done it. Not even, whether they race or not, doesn't really matter. So some of them will aspire to bring their racing as far as they can bring it, and that's great. But those who just want to get out and give it a go, then at least they've got people they can ride with and kind of get involved with. Talk
it's like-minded and friendships.
People all doing the same thing.
We see that through the club website. People, ladies contacting us. It's the group rides, and obviously we've had a few messages about that. And like you say, it's creating that environment to get people and ladies particularly involved in the sport, where it was ultimately, I guess, more male-dominated environment, certainly on the Isle of Man historically.
Exactly. So even like, say, I've brought them away to a few races across, and one, I love doing it because again, I'm kind of giving back my knowledge and experience to help them out, but it just allows them to give a race a good go at, but in a team environment rather than kind of going away with just on their own or just a family member bringing them away or whatever it may be. At least they're going away as a proper team and doing it to the best that we can do it with what resources we've got, basically. Yeah,
so those resources, you've sort of built a team around, got some sponsors that help you with that.
Yeah, so I've got Conister Bank and Mac Group Financial who've backed us over the last 3 years, actually. So they've been a big help to us. Just, as anybody knows on the island, it's just the travelling is the main thing. Definitely giving us that to get away and do these races.
I mean, I can see how, whether you manage, you don't really go out much, but you can see the level continuing from the ladies' side, kicking my ass, continuing to improve. So it's working for sure.
I mean,
and you see more women out and ladies out riding the bikes as well.
There's a lot more out, and the level. I mean, look at Jessie. Jesus, Jessie's kicking some of the guys' asses out there now, isn't she? Big time. So they're.
Well, she won that beat.
She won overall the
sport,
beat race.
The sporting race. Yeah, and they got strong lads. Strong lads in there.
Yeah.
And just as much as Jess is working, got a full-time job, so have all the lads. So it's a level playing field. She's not out full-time training.
Oh, no, not at all. No.
Those great opportunities. So then there's that. So you're involved in CycleFest.
Yeah. So that's something. Just came about through Paul Phillips. Brilliant event. So when he first approached me, when they first started that, just to kind of get involved as an ambassador, loved the sound of it. Loved the ideas that he was kind of putting together behind it. It sounded like a proper event. It wasn't just kind of something that was kind of run out the back of a village hall sort of thing. So definitely it was all singing, all dancing with the music festival and everything that was first involved with it. And then even this year, the way this year has been with everything, with COVID and everything else, I mean, the amount of entries that we had this year was absolutely out of this world. Biggest entry ever with just locals. And the way Paul runs it, everything he wants it to be an event. Yes, it's a cycling event, but it's that people going away and having the thought that they've been part of something that was something special. Basically, that's kind of what I see behind it, and it's something a little bit different and big time. So they feel like they've gone away and done one of these massive kind of sportifs that you go to Europe to do, basically.
And I think that desires to continue to, certainly hopefully for a year from now, our borders will be open, so there'll be that X amount of entry from the island again, plus the UK, worldwide people coming across.
Well, exactly, hopefully.
And it's not often you get to race on Manx roads closed either. I use the word race, even ride, but yeah.
Yeah, that I mean, the road closure thing is huge. The fact that he can get all that done and the roads that we're able to use, you wouldn't get that anywhere in the UK.
Yeah.
You can go and do the Premier calendars even. They're not racing on roads like that nowadays. Definitely not closed ones. So it's amazing, really.
And then there's What's Up Performance, your company.
Yeah.
Maybe the question is, what don't you do? But what do you do? Because you do a lot through that.
I don't do window cleaning.
Where did that start from?
I suppose that that started coaching initially. So the last few years that I was racing, I was also coaching some riders. So it evolved from that, really. So then when I fully stopped, I carried on with the coaching. Coaching has grown quite a lot over the years that I've been doing it. So I've been coaching for 10 years, I suppose, now. So that's the biggest side of it. And then that kind of evolved. I do bike fitting as well, so setting people's positions up. And that ranges from people who've never sat on a bike before in their lives.
This isn't about me, a racer. It's about all levels and abilities.
General people on bikes, basically. So even e-bikes, I'm getting people in with e-bikes, who just want to be comfortable to go out and enjoy a bike ride. So there's that. And then just the whole kind of performance and kind of mental aspect to sport as well. So I've kind of gotten... That kind of happened, I suppose, 2 or 3 years ago, where I kind of really looked into that side of the angle of it. So with NLP coaching,
that's Phil Quirk. Done some of his courses.
So I've done his course with the NLP practitioner, and that ties together so well with coaching. It's unreal. Like I said, the sporting athlete, if you like, or any athlete, their biggest battle is themselves. So they're just competing against themselves in their own head half the time, and it's kind of nailing into that a little bit and kind of working with the athlete and kind of making them realize what they can do rather than what they can't do.
Right.
And how many athletes are you currently coaching, working with?
I'm usually on roughly around 30 athletes. So, and that's kind of a good number. If I go more than that, I'm spreading myself a bit too thinly. And I've probably sat on roughly around that number for 7 or 8 years. I kind of sit on that number. And that's kind of developed year on year. And that's kind of part of coaching as well. Same as the athlete themselves are always looking for refinements or ways to improve. And as a coach, you have to do that as well. And definitely, if you're not doing that as a coach, you're not doing your job well, I don't think.
So 2 other quick questions that I have left. So you talked earlier about flag bearing, and I think kind of skimmed because we got straight into Delhi, but flag bearing for the Commonwealth Games, I imagine that was an experience and an honour.
Yeah, that was. I was asked to do that, which was great. That I've always thought of the Commonwealth Games as the biggest thing you can do to represent the Isle of Man, for sure, as an athlete. So it was an honour to be asked to do it.
You get to keep the flag?
No.
Oh, right.
You get to keep the hat.
Oh, right. Okay.
But yeah, that was great. That was kind of a one-off thing that I'll always kind of get to look back on and say I've done that sort of thing.
Yeah. And talking about all these kind of different things, actually, I've got another question, actually. But I know for a year, you're obviously friends with Cal Crutchlow, you travelled and helped him for a year travelling. How was that experience from just, whether you got to see much of each country, I don't know, probably not, straight to a track, sort him out, leave next. But how did you find that experience?
Good. So yeah, myself and Cal are, very good friends. So Cal needed what they call is rider's helper, basically. So he needed somebody 2018 and asked me to do it. So I was honoured to be asked, actually. And the funny thing is, we're such good friends. It was kind of a hard question for him to even ask me to do it. So yeah, I had coached him years before that when he was kind of working on his fitness gains a lot more. So, and then I went into his world where it was totally new to me. You're looking after one of the best motorbike racers in the world. Basically, you're working at MotoGP level, so that's as good as it gets. And you're looking at after that rider as a one-on-one. Anything and everything that they need. That's what you're there for, basically. So, which you kind of get coming from a cycling background, you get it but it's not done to the extent that it's done in MotoGP. It's a great experience, seeing a lot of the world, but like you say, all I seen was the inside of a garage and a hotel room, basically.
Maybe a couple of bike rides around the track.
I never seen a live bike that whole season on the track. I seen it on a monitor, and that's it.
What was the biggest surprise in that world?
The biggest surprise would be the lack of resources some of the riders use, because they can afford to get whatever they need to use. So fitness aspects, most of them are really fit guys. Most of them cycle to stay fit. Any one of them guys that are racing MotoGP could come and ride one of our races and probably bury half of us in the ground. Well, you've seen that.
As we've experienced how with Cal Paxton, yeah, many a times.
Yeah, but a lot of them don't look at the refinements that, say, a professional cyclist would look at. So diet, not as much. Definitely they don't use the mental side of the sport. And for them, like everything, they're straight out of the garage and doing 300k an hour, basically. And if their head's not in the game, then something's not going to work well. Yeah. But most of them don't use anything to work on that part of the sport. But then they're a little bit of a different breed as well. They're very, very self-motivated guys. And I think, and I don't know because I haven't spoken to most of them, but...
No, it's just your observations from being around.
Yeah, from observations, they must have a lot of mental strength to do what they do. They're putting their lives on the line. TT riders would be exactly the same. They're ripping down the road at ridiculous speeds, and what their thought process is behind that, I have no idea.
We spoke, I think it was on air briefly with Rich Sill about that, because he'd done a study. Yeah, and he talked about that, because they prepare that, certainly in the TT, they're pretty much preparing their own bikes to a point, to a level, but it's all controlled. So however we observe it from the outside, we're like, this looks out of control and crazy, much like they might look at a cyclist going down at 60k an hour in Lycra thinking he's nuts. But you've done it, you're in control, you've built the bike, you trust the bike, its limits, that it's all controlled, so it's therefore not irrational in your head. And I presume they're working on that same level of, they know pretty much the limit, and therefore they're ultimately in control of this. As much as you might not believe it, they're in control of the situation. But you still do wonder. They used to, people would say they got a screw loose, wouldn't you? But but in their world it's not.
No,
100%.
And you do get that. Like same with MotoGP, they're, so if you compared it to cycling, that's more like doing a criterium. It's a bunch start and it's a bunch race, and so all those other aspects that are going on, they probably don't even register. All they're thinking about is winning. They're thinking, I've got to get around this guy that's in front of me, and that's all that's what the register is, short term, basically.
And do you see that with Cal on a push bike, that ability to, because they must be so in tune with the bike to know where the movement is? I think I'd heard a story about you and Cal coming off the mountain once in some snow, and his ability to handle a bike. Yeah, is that kind of like just different level?
Oh yeah, like. The talent is unreal. Like Cal on a bicycle, his control on the bicycle is amazing. Like I've been training with him, coming down mountain descents with top professional cyclists, and he'll leave them for dust basically. Right. And going into corners on the front wheel, you know, doing stoppies into corners, doing 50k an hour and stupid things like that. I'm thinking, what are you even doing?
just talent, isn't it, and the ability to be in tune with the bike.
But exceptional athletes as well. So I mean, I know Cal well enough to say, like, as far as kind of grit and determination goes, I know nobody else with that same amount that he has. You know, I'm sure if he chose any other sport, he would have been top level, I would have said. Sure,
he could probably be a pro bike rider.
He probably could do, yeah. Oh, he likes to think he could do.
So the final question, which I kind of forgot, just to back on the training side, and you training athletes, what's your approach to athletes? Pretty much bespoke to if somebody needs a lot of hand holding and data is not important to them, albeit it's important to you to understand and interpret it. Yeah. What's your methodology?
Really working closely with the athlete. So it doesn't have to be data driven. I have athletes who don't use data at all, and that's fine. So it's just really.
Do you find it harder to coach that?
It's harder because you don't see
on
progression.
Verbal.
You're not seeing. So the data gives you the backup to see their progression, basically. So if somebody just telling you they feel good or they feel tired, then there's no backup to that. There's no reason. Sometimes there's no reason to figure out what's going on. So once you've got that data in place as well, then you can really build a picture and kind of monitor everything that's happening.
And I imagine ultimately for athletes, and this is something that with data as well, with athletes that have that, and most of us do have struggles in our head about our form, etc. That data's just, it's less about, I feel a bit tired. Why do I feel tired? You can just rationalize, or more importantly, you can rationalize the form. So your form might be going in a good direction, but if you have a couple of bad days, you end up overtraining because you think you're having a bad few days, or you are having a bad few days, so you overtrain, and then that bad day becomes a bad week, and that data must helps alleviate that problem.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've got I won't name them, but there's definitely a couple of people who struggle with confidence a little bit. So, and I know their fitness level is unreal, their numbers are unreal, and it's just reassuring them with the data. So that data helps that reassurance basically. So I'll do Zoom calls with them or sit down and talk to them if they're local. If they're not local, it's obviously Zoom is a great thing nowadays. And I'll show them on screen. So yes, you're telling me you're feeling terrible and things aren't going right. So firstly, there's your data. That's where you are physically, which is amazing. What else is going on in your life? That's where you can kind of get to something else that's kind of happening in the background. It's generally nothing to do with the sport. And, we can kind of work through things and see what else that might need change. And it might be, for those that are working, they might be going through a hard time at work or whatever it might be. So it's just little changes like that you can kind of get to.
And do you see triathletes as well?
I do, yeah. So more recently, actually, over the last couple of years, I've kind of taken on triathletes. So I don't deal with their swimming.
So I've heard. We could tell you triathlon story as well if you want from doing the.
So locally, so triathletes, I kind of structure their week basically. So that's the biggest part of the training, structuring how they manage their time.
Right.
Most of them will swim with a swim group. I will structure their runs for them should they want it. And obviously a structure.
Is that because it's similar to biking in regard to intervals and that type of?
Yeah, it's really very similar actually. And triathlon's a funny one where it's kind of distance dependent as well, depending on what distant event that they're aiming for. So you've got Olympic distance, Ironman athletes. Ironman athletes are easier to work with because it's massive. It's just
volume.
A massive volume and endurance event. So then that becomes a mental game basically, especially on some of the days. Some of their training days are just ridiculous basically.
That's kind of what they call brick days.
Bricks. Brick days. So at Ironman level, some of those days can be just horrible even looking at them.
It was on my list to do, but it's falling down at the moment, along with my knee. Thanks for coming in. I don't know whether you have any questions, Matt, before I cut you off. No. Thanks for coming in. It's been really insightful. Great to chat about those experiences back in the 90s as well, and hopefully, I'm sure people will find that interesting. I think I'd like to think the discussion hasn't all the people's view of cycling because it's such a beautiful sport. my belief is it is a good, clean place, as much as most other sports, if not more, probably than many sports that are out there.
Yeah.
Certainly, if you want to get involved in cycling, well, we're all sat around this table. We absolutely love the sport, and I think on the island it's very welcoming sport. I'm sure if people want to get in touch with it, they can always reach out to you through your website, Facebook, blah blah blah, and that type of thing. So, no, thanks for sharing your experiences with us.
No, thank you. Yeah, thank
pleasure.
you. As you say, hopefully people don't read into those dark day stories too much, and things are definitely,
No, well, your story's the other
sport.
side of that line, isn't it? Where you
Yeah.
didn't cross that line, and like you say, there's potential that you lost those opportunities. You live with that, and that's fine. But it's like you say, all we kind of hear is the other side of that line where people did cross it, and I think these are probably more interesting stories about those people that didn't. And there's Basson, is it? Is he the other? Is he the rider? Yeah. So he's a famous rider from the 90s who never crossed the line, was very vocal about it back then, and was belittled for many, many years until obviously the stories came out. So his story's very much similar to his, isn't it?
Yeah, I suppose it is in a way.
So no, thanks for coming in.
Thank you.
Yeah. So wherever you're listening to us today, please like, share, subscribe, and leave those 5-star reviews, pretty please. On the social side, Facebook, we're the M-Word Podcast, Twitter, Manx Sports Pod, and on Instagram, we are the M-Word IOM.
Thanks, sexy people, for letting us get in your ears. It's word out from Martin.
And word out from Matt.
Screw you guys, I'm going